Hello and welcome once again to The Income Generation, the show where we focus on financial topics and information relevant to today's generation of retirees and near retirees. Remember this great scene from A Christmas Story.
My kid brother looked like a tick about to pop.
What? What is it? What is it? Oh. What is it?
I can't put my arms out.
It's funny, but it also rings true if you grew up with an overprotective mother. I sure did, but I actually consider that to have been one of the greatest benefits of my entire life. Yes, it could be a little annoying at times while I was growing up, but in the end, my mom's overprotective instincts provided me with an important fundamental principle for my life and my career. That principle has served me very well, but most importantly, it's guided me in serving my clients through two major stock market crashes and a lot of economic uncertainty over the last 16 years. And on this show, you're going to learn why overprotection is still a valuable and important principle for today's generation of retirees and near retirees. To put it simply, if you're over 50, if you're a part of the income generation, I believe overprotection should be a fundamental part of retirement planning. To put it another way, I believe protecting your assets must be your first priority. Now, if that sounds familiar, you may have watched a recent episode of the show where I mentioned my new book, Return on Principle, 7 core values to keep your money safe in good times and in bad. One of the things I talk about in the book is how I first came to realize the importance of overprotection in financial planning, particularly for people at or close to retirement age. I personally started out as an advisor in the 1980s. And just like every other broker and advisor during that era, I helped my clients invest in the stock market. After all, we were in the midst of the best long-term bull market in our country's history. And that bull market continued right into the tech boom of the 1990s, and everyone wanted in on it. But it wasn't too long before all the market mania started to worry me. And the more I studied long-term market cycles of the past, the more worried I became. I started recognizing a lot of warning signs. And with each day, I became more and more convinced that the technology bubble was about to burst and that the market was headed for a major nosedive and the start of our next long-term secular bear market cycle. But while I was getting increasingly nervous and starting to share my concerns with my clients, others were saying the stock market was going to keep soaring all the way to the moon. In fact, a couple of experts named James Glassman and Kevin Hassett published a book in 1999 called The Dow at 36,000, the new strategy for profiting from the coming rise in the stock market. That's when those overprotective instincts that I picked up from my mom really kicked in, because not only was I growing more and more convinced that the market was about to fall, but I realized that many other analysts and advisors were telling people just the opposite. They were pushing people like my clients, retirees and near retirees, toward the stock market at what I believe was a very dangerous time. Could I have been wrong? Of course. But if I were correct, I knew that the consequences would be devastating for some of my clients had I not taken steps to protect them. That's why protection and even overprotection became my new mantra. When the tech bubble burst in 2000, the stock market ultimately fell by almost 50%. And it took 7 years to get back to its previous peak, meaning that over a 7-year period, buy and hold investors in the market, generally speaking, achieved 0% growth in their portfolios. When you factor in inflation, of course, their return was a negative number, less than 0. Then, when the financial crisis kicked off, the next major drop starting in 2007, the market this time fell by almost 60%. This time it took 6 years to get back to its previous high. But the net result of those two drops was that the stock market essentially experienced 0 growth from 2000 to 2013. Again, 13 years of 0 growth. To me, that really gets to the core of why overprotection is so important for investors over the age of 50. Keep in mind, if you lose 50% of your portfolio in the stock market, you need to get 100% recovery just to break even. And that's just how the math works. It takes time, and time is a luxury that you start to lose as you approach retirement age. And you have to start thinking about generating income from your life savings, instead of just sitting back and waiting for growth for the future. That's why after 17 years, I still believe that overprotection is so important. In fact, if you're interested in generating dependable income from your investments, I believe overprotection is more important than ever for two important reasons. One, I've already talked about quite a bit on the show in the past, which is that I believe we are again at a very dangerous time for anyone to be in the stock market. And the second is this. I know from experience that despite what you might have heard, overprotection doesn't have to come at the expense of reasonable returns. It is possible to have a financial strategy that gives you peace of mind without forcing you to give up much of anything else. I'll talk more about both these reasons on today's Market Breakdown.
Read David J. Scranton's groundbreaking new book, Return on Principle: 7 Core Values to Help Protect Your Money in Good Times and Bad. Discover practical solutions to the financial challenges facing today's generation of retirees and near retirees. Learn the truth about Wall Street, the financial media, and the secrets they try to hide from everyday investors. This isn't just another book about investing. Working Americans who have lived through 2 major stock market crashes and the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression in the past 16 years don't need another book about investing. David Scranton's approach to financial planning is a holistic system designed for maximum protection, strategic growth, and reliable income regardless of market conditions. Stop planning for retirement with your fingers crossed. Read Return on Principle: 7 Core Values to Help Protect Your Money in Good Times and Bad. Available now.
A reporter once asked me, "What are you most proud of in your career?" That was an easy question to answer. I've always been most proud of the fact that I had the courage back in 1999 to change my business model, to protect and even overprotect my clients when I knew that my old stock market-based model was no longer going to do the job. But the truth is, I never would have made that decision if my only motivation was to overprotect. I wasn't about to advise my clients to abandon the strategies they've been using that have successfully grown their monies for years previous without having a viable alternative for them. And that's one of the most important things to remember about investing for income. It only starts with overprotection. It only begins with financial defense. It makes protecting your assets your number one priority, but not your only priority. In today's Market Breakdown, you're going to learn why overprotection doesn't have to limit your investment options or hinder your investment returns. On the contrary, it opens up a whole new world of options for growing your money strategically, or as I like to say, growing your money organically, and with more certainty and peace of mind. Now, if that sounds contrary to what you've always heard about saving and investing, I'm not surprised. The common notion is that investing is a matter of risk versus return. The idea being that the only way to get decent returns and to grow your money is to take a lot of risk. Well, yes, it can be one way, but certainly not the only way. And if you're what I call a performance-based investor, it might just be your preferred way. In my language, performance-based means you see investing almost as a contact sport. Your goal is to always get the highest rate of return possible, regardless of what rate of return you actually need to achieve your goals. If you're a performance-based investor, you'll tend to invest aggressively in the stock market because that's the strategy that offers the greatest potential for big returns and maximum growth. But it's also the one that carries the highest risk for portfolio shrinkage. I can tell you that in my experience, the vast majority of people I've worked with do not approach investing in quite that way. I found that most people are what I call purpose-based investors, not performance-based. In other words, they don't care as much about performance. Instead, they save and invest with a particular purpose in mind. More often than not, that purpose is to have a steady, reliable income stream that they can count on through retirement. The point is, if your top goal is growth, then you should accept the risk and invest aggressively in the stock market for growth. But if your purpose-based goal is retirement income, then your alternative could be to invest for income in things like bonds and bond-like instruments. That's a way to achieve a reasonable rate of return with a lot less worry over loss of principal, or what I call portfolio shrinkage. So why isn't this common knowledge? Well, as I've said before, the common notion is that you can't have decent returns without risk, that you have to sacrifice one for the other. That's what many textbooks, the financial media, and a lot of brokers would like you to believe. Why? Because to one extent or another, a lot of them have a vested interest in keeping you invested in the stock market. It's good for their businesses, even if it may not always be good for you. But the real story is that there are actually two ways to grow your money. Yes, one is by giving up safety and taking investment risks to enhance your return. But the other is by committing to a time frame to conservatively grow your money. And the plain truth is that whichever approach you take, you're going to end up sacrificing something. Think about it. If you insist on both complete safety and complete liquidity in a particular investment, yeah, you can get it for sure. But the only way to get it is to limit your options to things like banks, money markets, or your mattress. And with banks and money markets paying less than 1% interest, you can barely call that growth or reasonable rate of return. In fact, it probably qualifies as shrinkage when you factor in this thing called inflation. And then when you factor in bank fees, your mattress might actually be better than some of those other options. So while you're definitely sacrificing safety if you take the aggressive approach, you're not necessarily sacrificing returns by taking the conservative approach, despite what you may have been led to believe. The only thing you may be sacrificing is a bit of liquidity. Let's take individual bonds for an example. When you buy a portfolio of individual bonds, you get two important guarantees. The first is a guaranteed interest rate for the life of the bond that you can use as a source for retirement income. The second is a guaranteed return of your principal once the bond matures, provided, of course, that the bond issuer hasn't defaulted. Of course, you also have the option to sell the bond early if you need the capital. Bonds can be sold in the secondary market just like stocks and mutual funds, and you'll get the fair market value. But again, if you hold it to maturity, you have those two important guarantees. Basically speaking, that's how investing for income works, by generating a consistent retirement income stream that you can live on without having to touch your principal. Your options for these kinds of income-generating vehicles include things like municipal bonds, corporate bonds, and preferreds, all of which have a stated fixed interest or dividend rate that their issuers cannot change without going into default. There are also other options that offer rates that aren't fixed, but that are fairly consistent and resistant to change. And I believe this is exactly how investing should work. Again, I go back to my overprotective mom. She gave me the same advice I know a lot of you probably got from your parents or grandparents. Spend your interest and don't touch your principal. That advice is as relevant today as it was back then when they first said it. And it's especially relevant once you get to or even near retirement age. You may have heard me speak on another show about two of the most dangerous and common mistakes retirees make with their money. One is spending down even just a little bit of principal in your early retirement years. It's a slippery slope that can quickly put you in danger of running out of money. The only thing worse than that is taking systematic withdrawals from a mutual fund to get your retirement income. I call that reverse dollar cost averaging, and it basically amounts to cannibalizing your own nest egg. And a lot of times, retirees make these choices simply because they don't realize there are other alternatives, that there are strategies that generate retirement income through interest and dividends while your principal is left intact. What's more, you and your financial advisor can create growth by taking that income that you don't need and reinvesting it in other fixed income vehicles. That's what I call organic portfolio growth, or growing your money the old-fashioned way. So again, the fact that you can, despite what you may have heard, achieve reasonable returns and grow your money strategically without the risk of the stock market is one reason I feel so strongly about this principle of overprotection. The other, as I've said, is the market itself. I truly believe that right now in early 2016, we are on the verge of another major market collapse, similar to those that have occurred twice since the turn of the century. And if history repeats itself, as I believe it does more often than not, then there's a chance this third drop could be even steeper than the last one. The bottom line is simple. If you're retired or near retirement, I believe that your top priority right now really should be financial defense or overprotection. But again, that's only the first step. Stay with us. We come right back after the break. We're going to have a special guest to talk more about the importance of financial defense or overprotection in your portfolio. We'll be right back. If you're not using someone who's well trained in fixed income and you're born before 1966, it may just be time for you to break up with that advisor and move on. I would suggest someone who will care for you through these important years of your life. If you need help finding someone, call or write us. I'd also like to remind you of the special report entitled The Income Generation. This is available free to you, our loyal viewers, online. If you haven't downloaded your report, pick it up after the show. If you're near or in retirement, head over to theincomegeneration.com and download your special report written specifically for the needs of the income generation, again, those born before 1966. I'm David Scranton, and you've been watching The Income Generation. Welcome back. Our guest today, Sean Broderick, is the resource strategist of the Oxford Club, which calls him the Indiana Jones of natural resources. You'll see why in just a minute. His work has taken him from diamond fields north of the Arctic Circle to an ancient city of silver in Mexico, to the frigid southern tip of Argentina, and just about everywhere in between. His best-selling book is called The Ultimate Suburban Survivalist Guide, the smartest moves to prepare for any crisis. And we're happy to have him with us today. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So tell me, what motivated you to write this book, The Ultimate Suburban Survivalist Guide?
Well, we had a year here in Florida where we had 3 hurricanes. And after the first hurricane, you know, I built my own survival pantry and I did a lot of things to my house to really make it safe. But I noticed after subsequent hurricanes, my neighbors lined up at the supermarket every single time. So I wrote a book about how to prepare in place and just to prepare for any emergency, whether it's weather, financial, you name it. And so that's basically why I did it.
So I want to focus a lot about the financial stuff because this is a financial show, of course, but focusing on the non-financial for just a minute first. Other than weather, what other types of non-weather emergencies do you teach people in the book how to prepare for?
Oh, well, earthquakes, of course. I mean, those are ones that you never know when they're coming, but when they come, you have to prepare for those. Forest fires, floods. There's all kinds of things that, you know, they're kind of fun to watch on TV, but they're horrible to have happen to you. And so when those things happen, you can either run around like a chicken with your head cut off, or you can be the prepared guy that everybody looks to help them out of this. And so that's really what it's about there.
That's right. Before every hurricane we have here in southern Florida, you can't get near a grocery store. The parking lot is filled. Everyone's stashing water and cans of tuna fish and everything else.
Right, but if you do it ahead of time, you can just be hanging out at home, mixing yourself a hurricane drink and watching those other people go crazy at the store, you know? So preparing really doesn't take that much more time, and also you can buy things when they're cheaper and just prepare for things and also use things out of your survival pantry over time, so really nothing has to go to waste. You can use it over time as well.
Good advice, very good advice. Let's focus on the financial for a minute now and talk about, tell our viewers about what types of financial crises do you think that they need to be prepared for?
Well, we're actually, there are things that could happen, and I'm not saying they will happen, but I like to be prepared for things that could happen. One fascinating experiment that's going on right now is that we are having negative interest rates at such an extreme rate around the world. About a quarter of the bonds in the world now trade at negative interest rates. We've never done that before. We are pushing the limits on what is possible in the financial system. You know that can't actually go on this trend for infinity. It has to end somehow. When that ends, what actually is going to happen? Another thing people might want to worry about is like what happens with the US dollar. It's had a great run for a while, but when you look at it, I think that even though the Fed said that it was going to hike rates 4 times this year, then they changed their minds and said 2, and then they said, well, maybe we'll have 1 more hike. They aren't going to hike anymore this year because they simply can't. There's too much pressure on them because it's an interwoven financial system around the globe, and so as things push and pull, you really have to react to it, and so that really ties their hands.
Sure, and I know I tend to go out on a limb a little bit more when it comes to predicting the stock market side because that's really my side, and I know you'd mentioned the fact that that's not your specialty, but you're more worried about how these things could affect the economy.
Yeah.
Let's face it, if the Fed raised interest rates and central banks around the world raised interest rates, especially if the Fed did it, that would help keep the dollar strong. That for starters, and it would solve the negative interest rate problem. But then what would happen to the economy? The economy would go right down the toilet.
Right, and there are these governments around the world that really can't raise interest rates. Look at China, for example. I mean, they have been piling up debt, not only on the corporate side, but in the local government side, like it's insane. They have all these public works projects, which they have to do, because they have to keep people employed, but they go into debt to do it. They can't raise interest rates at this point. They are really trapped. And they have such a tremendous amount of debt. Who do they sell that debt to? Probably big funds that a lot of people might be invested in that they don't know actually own that debt.
Yeah.
There's a lot of this stuff around there. It's a big interlocked system, and so there's just the potential that things could go wrong. Now, the men in the gray suits are trying very hard to keep things moving along and keep things balanced and keep all those plates.
Sean, you're wearing a gray suit.
Well, I am, all right. But I'm not one of those dudes. But they're working hard to keep all the plates up in the air, and they're very good at it. I just worry about what happens if things actually fail. And if things actually fail, then you want to be prepared for it.
So are you looking at the negative interest rates as causing a problem, or are you looking at the negative interest rates as being a symptom of a much bigger problem?
I think it's a symptom of a much bigger problem. And you can look at it in like multiple ways. One is that, just basically writing blank checks. That's how we get here, is they're spending money they don't have. And so there's all this debt, and it just kind of snowballs after a while. The cure for that can be painful, and we haven't wanted to take that pain, which makes, the cure becomes worse and worse and worse. For a while, it was just going to be a bad taste in the mouth. Now it might actually be bordering on poison. So we're not sure how that actually works out down the road, but as long as they don't change the situation, it actually gets worse.
So what do you think that pain is then? Is it just letting interest rates float and not micromanaging the rates as much, and maybe we go into a prolonged recession, but we kind of lick our wounds and then things go back to normal? Is that kind of your thought process?
I think it ends in a prolonged, deep global recession. I mean, that would be the obvious way it ends. Then again, those guys with all the plates in the air, they might have another plan. Frankly, I never saw them doing this huge negative interest rate policy around the world. That was kind of a rabbit they pulled out of the hat. What else are they going to do? I don't know. And so maybe they'll do something really creative, but at some point you have to pay the piper. And so I think the way we pay the piper is with a prolonged global recession. Now, if we get the pain over and then we start to stimulate the economy again in the right ways, I mean, there are bridges that are falling down and stuff we could do like that, right? So if we stimulate the economy in the right ways and actually get things moving correctly, then we can rebound from it. I'm not a doom and gloomer.
Right.
I just like preparing for things that can go wrong.
No, absolutely, I agree. And the reality of it is right now, Swiss bonds, 10-year Swiss bonds, as you know, have a negative interest rate. That means you invest $1,000 in a 10-year Swiss bond, and 10 years later, you really end up with $97. That's the extreme example. So we need to take a quick break now. So stay with us. We'll be right back with more from Sean Broderick. We'll be right back.
The closing numbers on the markets today, at one point the market fell as if down a well over 700 points.
Apple shares are just getting hammered this morning.
We're down by between 3 and 4.5% generally across these markets. Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate. We're red everywhere, essentially, down by 4-5%.
We're down over 16%. Dow at the same time has fallen about 18%.
The stock market is now down 21%.
Because we're now down 43%.
What in the world is happening on Wall Street?
Finally, there is an alternative. Read David J. Scranton's groundbreaking new book, Return on Principle: 7 Core Values to Help Protect Your Money in Good Times and Bad. Discover practical solutions to the financial challenges facing today's generation of retirees and near retirees. Learn the truth about Wall Street, the financial media, and the secrets they try to hide from everyday investors. This isn't just another book about investing. Working Americans who have lived through 2 major stock market crashes and the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression in the past 16 years don't need another book about investing. David Scranton's approach to financial planning is a holistic system designed for maximum protection, strategic growth, and reliable income regardless of market conditions. Stop planning for retirement with your fingers crossed. Plan with confidence, knowledge, and peace of mind. Read Return on Principle: 7 Core Values to Help Protect Your Money in Good Times and Bad. Available now.
We're here today with Sean Broderick, author of the best-selling book called The Ultimate Suburban Survivalist Guide, the smartest money moves to prepare for any crisis. Now, I know you were talking early on about weather crises, earthquakes, floods, everything, tornadoes, things like that. And then we got into the financial side. You know, this show today is really about overprotection. I always talk about the 7 values to keep your money safe in good times and bad. And I've coined this phrase called overprotection. How important do you think it is for our viewers, members of the income generation, to focus on protection, focus on defense when it comes to their money?
Well, I know that as I've been getting older, I've been shifting more and more of my portfolio to things that are safer. I mean, you have to stop taking the risks that you did when you were younger. Then again, you know, your bragging rights come from the crazy things you do, and I think everybody loves to do that too.
That's right, that's
right. They do. But yeah, you just have to shift more, basically, I think.
Good. And you know, it's funny you say bragging rights. I always talk about purpose versus performance. I talk about some people invest for a purpose. You know, they want to make sure they have enough income, enough of inflation hedge. They want to know they're never going to run out of money when they retire. Others are more performance-based, which means they get pride out of those bragging rights. And that's okay in younger years, but you're right. As you get closer to retirement, you need to become more purpose-based. You need to think about your goals as an individual.
Where I would disagree, and you're absolutely right, more of your portfolio should be protected. But I do find men my age and older really enjoy those bragging rights. They want me to go find them the next big gold mine, because then they get to say, I get into that gold mine when it was under $1 and now it's 20. And so, you know, there is that part of it too, but you have to balance your life.
But they need to be doing that with a smaller and smaller part of their money as they get older.
Smaller part of
That's
their
right.
money, exactly, right, yeah.
And I know we talked before the break about how interest rates being negative interest rates around the world. Even in February, the Federal Reserve momentarily talked about maybe going to negative interest rates, and then they went, oh, shh, we're not going to talk about this anymore.
Yes.
Well, and I believe it's going to come back. It's going to come up in conversation again. And you said you thought that was a symptom of a bigger economic problem that the government the Federal Reserve just hasn't allowed to settle out. But then you also talked a little bit about a couple of other things, the dollar, for example. Now, help me out with this. Help our viewers out, because we hear that a weak dollar is actually good. You know, your concern is the dollar has strengthened. That's been an ongoing trend. That's going to stop. The dollar is going to weaken. We hear, gee, it's great because with a weaker dollar, we can export more goods and services.
Yeah,
but you have a little bit of a counter argument I'd like you to share.
Right. Well, one thing people have to understand is the strong dollar has been so good for them because they're able to buy things on the cheap, including investing in foreign companies on the cheap. When that flip-flops, when the U.S. dollar starts to lose value, you might have more dollars, but they'll be worth less and less, right? So as a corporation, it can be a good thing. As an individual, the falling dollar is not a good thing. There are also other things that can go wrong in a currency. I have friends from like Argentina. They went through a currency crisis like you wouldn't believe. I should say I hope we aren't headed for an Argentina type like currency crisis, but things can go wrong with your currency that can really shatter your concept of how money works.
No, in Greece's debt to GDP was 140% when they really would have defaulted had everybody else not jumped in to rescue them. And we're over 100% already. So we're heading in that direction if we don't change things.
Just a moment on Greece. First of all, they lied their way into the European Union, right? And the handmaidens of that lie were the big banks. They helped them, file all the papers to show they could do it when they couldn't. When the EU came in to bail them out, they didn't bail out Greece. They bailed out the banks to make sure the banks got paid first.
Yeah.
So Greece is one of those things that could actually wreck Europe if it's a tiny, tiny country, but it's a symptom of what could go wrong in like other countries, Portugal, Italy, places like
Spain,
that.
sure.
Yes, right. Those things can snowball if they don't take care of it.
But I always talk about the fact that their interest rates, Spain and Italy, for example, on their 10-year government bond is actually lower than ours. But we have a higher credit rating. So it's insane. So as far as the dollar is concerned, okay, a weak dollar is great for corporate America. So if you're a stockholder, you praise a weak dollar. But if you're just an average American consumer, it's a bad thing.
Right, exactly. Okay. I mean, that's just the thing that you have to be aware of is if the U.S. dollar loses 10% of its value, your purchasing power of imported goods becomes 10% less.
Okay, perfect. Now, you mentioned China, and you said that China's debt. Well, wait a minute. I thought China was a creditor nation. China owns all of our bonds. They have so much money. That's what everybody thinks. They have so much money. Tell our viewers a little bit about your China concerns. Well,
yes. I mean, the problem is they have racked up so much debt because they've had all these build-outs of all these public work projects to keep people employed. And also they have all these things called zombie companies, which is companies that should fail, but they don't allow them to fail, so they have to keep paying everybody. And so they have these problems, and they just pile up debt after debt after debt. And so that could be a real strain on their currency. Now, they artificially control their currency. They don't allow it to float free. When they do, that could be a wake-up call. Maybe things will work out, maybe things won't, but that's another risk that the world has to face.
So just having billions of people isn't necessarily going to solve that problem over there.
No, it will not. Now, as someone who's interested in precious metals, I love that they have billions of people and they have a cultural affinity to gold.
That's right.
That's great for my business.
Demand. Good. Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me on.
All good things come to an end. Time flies when you're having fun.
I had a great time.
All those such cliches. And so you heard it straight from Sean Broderick, author of the best-selling book, The Ultimate Suburban Survivalist Guide, who says, watch out for the men in the gray suits, even though he's wearing a gray suit. Stay with us. As soon as we come back, we'll talk with Morgan, and we'll have a nice conversation about why you should focus on overprotection of your retirement monies. We'll be right back. If you're near or in retirement, head over to theincomegeneration.com and download your special report written specifically for the needs of the income generation, again, those born before 1966. I'm David Scranton, and you've been watching The Income Generation.
Another really interesting show, David, but there's one thing you mentioned a couple of times that I found especially interesting. And that's the idea that this alternative strategic approach to investing is really foreign to a lot of people because it's really kept hidden on purpose. Is that accurate?
In many cases it is, and what most people don't realize is that a lot of so-called financial advisors are not true advisors. They're really salespeople disguised as financial advisors. And as a result, you get a lot of people that are salespeople first and financial technicians second. And this is true even if you get out of the brokerage community. Even if you're dealing with investment advisors, registered investment advisors, a lot of them might have 3 or 5 different preset portfolios. And their job is to determine which of those 3 or 5 portfolios best suits you and then to put you into that particular portfolio. So again, it's salesman first, educator, technician second.
So obviously it's really important not to just adopt an overprotective mindset for yourself, but also to know that your advisor has that same principle.
Absolutely. Because remember, if you have an overprotective mindset and you don't want to be sitting in cash, money markets, under the mattress making zero, then you want to be in fixed income. That's really your other alternative.
Okay. And
most advisors are in one camp or another. They're either stock market experts or they're fixed income experts.
Okay.
You know, think about it. There's a very seldom that you see an orthopedic surgeon become a chiropractor or a chiropractor becoming an orthopedic surgeon. They have different specialties. So ultimately, what you want to determine with your money, if you're looking for a financial advisor, is that financial advisor a specialist in fixed income, or are they a specialist in the stock market? Because it's very, very rare that somebody actually has the bandwidth to specialize in both.
Okay. Well, in the new book you have coming out this summer, you actually have a list of questions that you recommend people ask either themselves or an advisor that they have or an advisor they might be considering to determine if they have the right overprotective skills and mindset.
That's right. Do they have the internal game set the way they need to have it, whether they're doing it themselves or having the use of an advisor? Because advisors are no different. As we said before on the show, financial advisors are human beings. Some are wired to be good investors, therefore good advisors, and others simply are not, just like a lot of do-it-yourself or investors.
Well, let's go through these questions one by one so we can expound upon each one. And since we're already talking about advisors, let's start with the questions you would ask the advisors.
Oh, boy. All right. The book isn't that way. The book tells the individuals first, so you're messing with my OCD here. I want to let you know.
And our last show, we started with the individuals, but, you know, I like to mix it up a little, kind of, you know.
Right. Well, I am 75% Polish, so I guess if you do it backward, it'll fit.
See?
So let's go for it.
Let's go for it.
Let's
okay.
mix it up.
So the first question is, for your typical client at my stage in life, and as we know, I'm not quite at what you consider the income generation just yet, but I'm certainly at the age where I need to start thinking about investing and thinking about my long-term future. So what percentage of my assets would you have in common stocks or stock mutual funds versus income generating alternatives?
Right. So let me answer that question, not so much for you at your extremely young age, right?
Of course.
Let me answer that question for your typical income generation viewer.
Okay.
A lot of advisors are addicted to what's a 70-30 or 60-40 portfolio. It seems like the 60-40 portfolios tend to be cookie cutter, and that means 60% in the stock market, 40% conservative. So I would like to hear somebody who's over 50 years old, I'd like to hear them maybe have a recommendation of 25, 30, maybe 35% in the stock market. Really not much more than that if someone's that close to retirement or currently retired.
And I know you've mentioned before, if you're a little younger, maybe you can have a little bit higher percentage, but you don't want to go too crazy.
No, absolutely not. And because if you think about it, you even a younger person, even somebody a little younger than yourself. Now, they have to be down in their teens to be a little bit younger, and we all know that, right?
Right.
But even somebody younger than yourself is 13 years of zero growth. I mean, does someone 20 years old want to wake up 13 years later at age 33 having gotten zero growth on their money?
Absolutely not. They're better off stuffing it in the mattress.
Of course not. That's right.
Okay. Well, let's move on to number two. Okay. What percentage of assets do you tell your clients they can take annually from the portfolio while being reasonably confident that they will never run out of money?
This is important, and a lot of advisors know this, but because they're salespeople first, they don't want to say no, so they're always willing to say, oh, yes, if you want to take X amount of dollars out, you can. There's some rules of thumb out there, but the rules of thumb are really 3 or 4%. So that means if you have $1 million, you can only take $30,000 to $40,000 per year of income. If you still want to maintain an inflation hedge, you want to be reasonably confident that you're not going to outlive your money. But that assumes also that you're invested with at least 2/3 of your money invested for income, for interest or dividends, not for growth.
Okay, and that brings us to our next question, which is how do you generate enough interest or dividends from the portfolio to satisfy the income needs of your clients?
Okay. That's interesting because it's a little bit of a trick question. What you might get here is you might get a blank stare. Well, we just put you in these mutual funds and you take these withdrawals. But remember, that's what we call reverse dollar cost averaging, which is a very dangerous financial strategy for anyone who's taking income. So hopefully you get an answer when asking that interview question that, well, we invest in these types of tools and they invest enough interest, they earn enough interest or dividends to satisfy the income you need. And as our regular viewers know, bond mutual funds are probably not the right answer. If you hear an advisor saying, well, we put you in bond mutual funds, that's a big warning sign that They specialize in the stock market.
Not overprotective at all.
That's right, that's right.
Okay, well, number 4 to ask your advisor, during each of the 2 market drops since 2000, how did you respond to clients who called in a panic? What did you tell them to calm their nerves?
Okay, this is what we talked about just a moment ago. You know, you hope that they calm their nerves, but they reacted in some way, and they did something proactive. Maybe if the market was only down 20%, they got their clients out with a 20% loss and didn't let them ride the markets all the way down.
Okay.
What you're looking for a warning sign is somebody said, well, I told them that over the long run the market does better. And I was right, the market came back. That's a warning sign, because again, that means they were happy with their clients making 0 return, getting 0 growth for 13 years. And that's a real problem if the advisor answers with something like that.
Definitely not something I'd be happy with.
Yeah.
Well, we've got to take a quick break right now, but don't go anywhere, because when we come back, we'll be discussing more questions you need to ask yourself and your advisor to make sure you're overprotective of your assets.
This is fun. This is great. 3, 2, 1. But I'd like to take a few seconds and tell you why I decided to write the book entitled Return on Principal. Basically, it all boils down to this. Let's face it, you deserve to live a happy retirement. It's as simple as that. But for many, the subject of money, finance, and math is complicated. Here's a fun fact. Many Americans claim that they'd much rather clean a toilet than calculate a tip in a restaurant. Thank you, I guess. But it doesn't have to be that complicated. Using the 7 core values I outline in my book, you too will be able to build a life based upon the right core principles. Cut. Return on Principal isn't just a book about financial investing, it's about investing in your life. I know for a fact that you're going to love it. Okay, now it's just getting a little weird here.
Welcome back to The Income Generation. I'm talking with David Scranton about important questions you should ask your advisor and yourself to make sure you are being overprotective with your assets. Okay, the last major question you should ask your advisor is, what major changes did you make to your client allocation model after 2003 and again after 2009?
This is where we hope that the advisor actually did make changes.
Okay.
If the advisor says, I have not made any changes, my model works because the market came back, that should be a warning sign of a problem. If the advisor says, yes, after the first drop or after the second drop, I looked at historical market cycles. I realized this is something that has continued throughout history, and I changed my business model to be more conservative and overprotect. If you hear that, then that is the answer you're looking for, and that should make you happy as somebody shopping.
Well, this is really, really good stuff, because I know on a personal level, it's so important to have a financial advisor that you feel comfortable with and you feel is on the same page with your goals and your wants. So how do you find that special someone that's going to really look out for your future?
That special someone, that's right, there is no, it's just for lunch for financial advisors. So the most important thing is just that. It's important that you feel comfortable with the person. You got to be on the same page intellectually and also from a risk tolerance and gut instinct standpoint. You know, the way not to find the advisor is to go to Google. That's the mistake. Referrals are often very, very strong, but the other option is that, you know, our advisors can look us up and reach out to us at any time, and we can see if we have a referral source in their geographical area, as long as they're in the continental United States.
Okay.
That might be able to give them a good head start.
And a personal referral really, I think that helps.
Yeah.
Put you down the right path.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, let's switch gears a little bit.
Okay.
In the book, you also have questions for retirees or potential retirees to ask themselves to determine if they have the right overprotective mindset. So let's go over those now.
Certainly.
Okay. Well, the first one is, do you refuse to open up your statement envelopes for fear of what's inside? That's a big, scary way to start.
Yeah, I don't even think I need to say much about that. But historically speaking, whether it was the technology bubble when it burst or the financial crisis, you know, and you know who you are, if you really got the statement in the mail and left it on the counter for a few days because you were afraid to open it, or maybe even worse, you never opened it, then that's a sign that you might need to work with a financial advisor. You may not have the internal game to do what you need to do to be a good do-it-yourselfer.
It's clearly not working.
Yeah.
So the second question is, do you lose sleep over what the markets did today? Now, is that question more about paying too much attention or being too obsessed?
Yeah, if you lose sleep, it means you're probably not overprotective enough. It probably means you're taking more risk than you're comfortable with taking. And if that sounds familiar, where you're in a 60-40 portfolio or 70-30 geared more towards stocks or towards stock mutual funds because that's what you were told you should do, but yet it's adding stress and anxiety to your life, then again, you need to be able to deviate from the pack and be overprotective and follow your gut instincts.
Okay. So question number 3 to ask yourself, or retirees planning on retirement, if in the middle of any given day that the market was plummeting, was it difficult to concentrate on anything else?
Again, if you were conservatively invested and just worried about the markets, just even though you weren't in them, that's one thing. But if you were in the markets heavily, and that's why you're worrying about these potential losses, then again, it's a sign that you may not be overprotective enough with your own money. You might be following all these Wall Street cheerleaders as they push you into riskier investments, and that's what's giving you that kind of sort of agita or discomfort.
And speaking of discomfort, let's talk about fear. Number 4, do you change your spending habits out of fear, like the folks on Worth Avenue we've talked about in earlier shows?
That's a great question because I can tell you firsthand that my clients or clients of any advisor that specializes in the universe of non-stock market income generating alternatives don't typically have to change their spending habits when the stock market does poorly. They sit back and they have the peace of mind to know that they can still go out to dinner when they want, they can still travel when they want. In fact, they can do it more because they get better deals because prices are coming down.
And finally, number 5, my favorite, the Hail Mary. Do you ever pray to God that if the market recovers, I promise I'll never be in the stock market again?
I cannot tell you how many people I've heard say that kind of thing in 2003 and in 2009 when the market was at the bottom both times. And then, as soon as the market went back up, all of a sudden they seem to forget about that after 2 years and want to stay put. But again, you know who you are. And if you found yourself at one point praying to God saying, gee, if the market comes back, I swear I'll never go back into it again. Once I have my money back, I'm out for good. But yet you're still heavily invested in it. Again, a sign that you probably don't have the sense of overprotection you need to be a successful do-it-yourself investor.
Okay, well, great tips. And speaking of investor education, let's get to a little bit of that and share your final thoughts for today.
Sounds fair enough. Thank you. All right. So as you think about things we've talked about on today's show, consider this analogy. If you're a parent or grandparent and your 8-year-old wants to ride his bicycle, chances are you're going to go out of your way to make sure that he's wearing a helmet and probably even knee pads and elbow pads and whatever other type of padding you can force upon him. You want to know that he's really protected, even overprotected. And of course that makes sense. He's small and perhaps physically more fragile and less coordinated than an adult or even an older child. But if your 15-year-old, on the other hand, is going to ride his bike, odds are you won't insist on all that protection. Partially because he probably wouldn't listen to you anyway, but mainly because you know that he's bigger, stronger, more coordinated, and doesn't really need the same level of protection as his younger brother. The two could get into the exact same accident on their bikes, but odds are the older child would have much less chance of getting seriously hurt even without all that protective gear, and have a much lower chance of getting hurt in the first place. The point is that the level of protection you need changes depending upon what stage you're in your life. And if you think about that in terms of money, the level definitely increases once you're at or near retirement age. Even when you're young, you certainly don't want to be reckless with your money. You always want some level of safety and protection in your financial plan. But for most of us, in our younger years of investing, our main priority is growth, not safety and protection. We're in the accumulation stage of our lives at that point. And that's understandable, and it's okay when you're in your 30s or even early 40s because you have an ace in your back pocket, and that ace is called time. You can afford to be a little riskier in your strategies because even if you suffer a major loss, you have the luxury of time on your side to rebuild. But once you hit the stage of life where retirement is just 10 or 15 years down the road, once you become a member of the income generation that ace in the hole is gone. You no longer have time on your side, and if you suffer a major loss, it may mean having to put off retirement or dramatically alter the lifestyle you've planned on living. That's why I believe it's so important to have overprotection as one of your core values, why protecting your assets should be your first priority. As we've explained on today's show, that's not a strategy that limits you like you may have been led to believe previously. Rather, it's a strategy that helps you to ensure that your money is not only protected from the next major market collapse, but is growing organically and generating consistent, reliable income that's difficult to outlive. I believe that's exactly how investing should work, especially if you're part of the income generation. Thanks so much for watching.